Good afternoon, and welcome to the GSV webinar. The kids are not all right, how schools can best save students. And I'm joined today by an extraordinary group of experts and educators and empathetic parents, and also, I have the pleasure of orchestrating an incredible orchestra. As a symphony conductor, Mark Brackett, who heads the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, Dr. Aaliyah Samuel, who is the president and CEO of CASEL, the leading organization in the country focused on social and emotional learning, and Julia Heiser, my partner, who is an SVP and head of program and community at the ASU+GSV Summit, former educator, former senior executive at Teach for America, and a parent. As is Aaliyah. So we're gonna kind of jump right in and talk about a lot of things. We're gonna talk about the kids are not all right. What does the data say? What does that mean? We're gonna talk about what we can do. We're gonna talk about the science behind all this. And I'd kind of like to kick it off with sort of the obvious question. The term SEL, or social emotional learning, has been reinterpreted in 1,000 different ways over the last few years, some positive, some not. And I'm just, I would just love to hear from each of you your perspective on what SEL means and its role in the education ecosystem, particularly in schools. Maybe Leah, kick off with you, if that's okay.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. And thanks so much, Deb, for inviting me to join in this call. And I want to just level set that as I come to this conversation, I'm coming to it from various perspectives. First and foremost, I was a public school educator for almost 10 years, special ed teacher, assistant principal, so a decade boots on the ground. Also, I am a parent. I have 2 sons, one in middle school, one finishing up elementary school. So I see it from a parental perspective as well. And then I've been in the policy space a long time, working with policy leaders on sound education policies. And with SEL in particular, I want to talk about it in a couple of different ways. One, just brass tacks, how do educators talk about social emotional learning? And I want to use an example from a district leader who really said what social emotional learning is. It is the binder or the glue that holds all other education initiatives together. It is that cohesive whole where we talk about academic rigor, because academic performance is absolutely critical, both in the content and content understanding, but also building curiosity, resilience in our students as well. And it's not just about bifurcating social emotional learning and academics, but it's really that integration or that glue of the two of them. And so it's helping folks to understand that critical foundation of how all learning begins. So another example is to really think about social emotional learning as the motherboard that taps in other skills that are utilized throughout life. Another way that I like to think about connecting social emotional learning is right now in the spring, you typically see 2 things happening. Report cards are coming out, and also you see a whole tranche of new drivers, middle school, kids learning how to drive. And I want to talk about some report card examples alone. If you take a sample of 100 report cards, student report cards from across the nation, you are going to see those academic skills, but also these life skills or social emotional learning skills also present. Things like takes responsibility for actions, that's self-awareness, demonstrate active listening skills, works effectively within a group, follows directions, exhibits organizational skills, uses time constructively, follows routines. Another example I have here, accepts responsibility for their own actions, demonstrates self-confidence. So when we talk about skills that are needed in order to have school success, it is truly that combination of academic skills, the reading, the writing, the math, the social studies, all of those pieces, but also how a student is able to approach learning as well, which is why these social emotional learning skills are so foundational. Another example, we're taking our middle schooler to high school orientation, and the parking lot was filled with new drivers with their parents because it's an open high school parking lot. And then when we think about these skills like responsible decision making, it's one thing we want all new drivers to have, because they're making decisions on the road. They're new drivers, they're going to have friends in the car. The process of thinking through the implications of their decisions that they make, speeding, not speeding, texting and driving, not texting, seatbelt use. So when we talk about responsible decision making as just an example of these social emotional learning skills, they're not only practical to approach learning, but also day-to-day life as well. So it's that combination of the two.
Wonderful. Julia, you want to jump in and kind of comment from your multiple ends on this, and then Mark, I'll get you into some of the research.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Samuel. That was amazing. And I was taking notes as you were sharing. I think from my perspective, so I was also a classroom teacher, and I coached teachers for a long time, and then turned into an administrator role and hired a lot of teachers. And I think about that lens is when I was hiring a teacher, I also wanted them to be able to do all of those things. It's not just about the K-12 system, and obviously all of the things that you named in terms of it's not an add-on, it's integrated, but those are life skills. Those are things that as I work with adults every day, we want them to be also having self-awareness, active listening, organizational skills, responsible decision-making. So when I think about my own elementary age children who are approaching this, and I loved the motherboard, we talk about that Inside Out movie and how kind of that's what we're talking about. It's not like you leave it at the door when you go into your classroom. You're bringing in those problem solving skills. You're bringing in those active listening skills into every single setting. I'm also thinking about that as people enter in the workforce and enter in post-secondary. What does that look like as you're leaving the K-12 setting and being an active member out in the world?
Mark, you've obviously been doing, leading national, global research on the topic for many years. At some point, I'm going to have to, I've got permission, his wonderful book, Permission to Feel, but you've also got a new book coming out, which I will not fail to make sure, I have a title sitting in front of me. I'm reading it right now, but it's done incredible work here. Can you just talk to, because we do know, whether you're hearing about the bullying or whether you're hearing about the rapid increase in behavioral issues in classrooms today compared to even pre-COVID or 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or so, when my children were growing up. I'm now a grandmother of 3, so I've moved to the other side of the edge. But what are you seeing from a research perspective and your insights there?
Sure. I want to just kind of follow on to what was just said, which is that we agree in terms of the role of social emotional skills in academics, right? You need, think about the daily life of a kid. They wake up in the morning and they're in relationship with their families or not. They go to school, they walk in, they say, do I feel safe here? Do I feel welcome here? They're in class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4. Phys ed, I was, I'm an athlete as an adult. I was not an athlete as a kid. I can tell you that it was not fun being picked last on the team. All right, bracket, come on over. Great, thank you. It's endless in terms of where these skills are needed and why the adults who are both raising kids and teaching kids and leading schools need these skills too. But I also want to make the case, as a professor at a university, and particularly at a university that values cognitive ability, because what gets you into our university is not right now your social and emotional skills, it's your test scores and your grades. And you might assume that every student is successful because, my gosh, great grades, great test scores, letters of recommendation, and extracurricular activities that you don't even know what they mean. And the answer is they're not. And it's unfortunate because when you only focus on cognitive abilities and you don't focus on social and emotional skills, what happens is that at some point you're going to have to get feedback about your progress by someone who's going to give you really harsh feedback. At some point you're going to get really disappointed in a goal that you didn't achieve. You're going to get anxious when you have to get out there and kind of sell your idea. And if you don't have the social and emotional skills to manage the life that is part of achieving your goals, oftentimes it's the barrier to achieving goals. And I think that's just an important message. And we hear that in the workforce. When we go to companies, they say things like, we know your students are smart, but can they inspire a team? Can they take feedback? Can they, lead a meeting where people want to listen to them and they're engaging, and the list goes on in terms of the value added, of these skills.
And when was it that we decided that there were two buckets, right? I mean, that schools had, cognitive, cognitive training. To your point, you don't get into Yale
Sure.
unless you have high SATs and high, grades and everything else, and judgment and life skills and all the things that you need to function in an education system, let alone an employment system. Why has this become so bifurcated? It's certainly. I mean, as humans, we're not bifurcated. I mean, it's just not the reality of life, right? So, what precipitated?
I'll give you my 2 seconds and turn it over to others to share. But this is not something new. The emotion side of things has always been seen as soft. I mean, historically in psychology, it was like, we don't study emotions because that's like in your head. It's not objectively verifiable, right? There's no way to measure it. And as if like people's feelings never mattered. That was a weird slip, married. Anyhow, it does impact your relationships. I can tell you that too. And so with regard to academics, and we'll get into this in more detail, right, the mindset is like objectively verifiable. Like I can grade math, I can grade science. How do you grade social and emotional skills? And people are afraid of that. I think the beautiful thing though about it, and I'll stop here, is that there's no criterion of correctness for the work that we do. It's like me being who I am from my cultural and ethnic background. What I need to help me deal with my emotions might be very different than what Aaliyah or Julia or you need, Deb. And that's okay. And so if we can get that message out there that the educator doesn't have to be the knower of everything, but they have to be the co-facilitator of an environment to help kids cultivate the skills they need to navigate their lives.
Mark, I'd love to pick up right there because learning environment is one. I really think, Deb, there's three contributing factors. One, the learning environment has changed. Two, the focus on education has become spotlighted. And then three, this dominating conversation on academic performance. And I want to unpack all three. One of the things the pandemic did is fundamentally it showed us front and center that learning can happen in different places and spaces. And so when the learning environment started to change, whether it was through remote instructions, pods, outdoor time, to have more time outdoors, one of the things that happened, it has started to pressure test the industrial version of education where you come into a classroom, you sit in rows, you get the information and you go. So it really started to pressure test that whole theory of what learning environments should and could look like across the entire education continuum. So that tension between how kids really are learning, the environments that they need to be in to be successful, coupled with the academic piece, all have us questioning what are the right learning environments for this generation. Not us who've already been through the system, but those that are coming through the system now, recognizing the significant impact that the pandemic had on self-management and use of time, and also technology in the classroom. The second thing is, because of the pandemic, the spotlight on education was brighter than ever before. And also we had folks who are not within the field of education being very vocal about their opinions about what should be happening in the classroom, which is where I think we really need to continue to elevate the educator voice and educator principals, teachers who are boots on the ground to really amplify the realities of the classroom right now. And then third, this piece on academic performance. We saw the impact that remote learning and just learning loss overall had during those first few years coming out of the pandemic. And as we continue to underscore and even unpack the most recent NAEP data, there is a focus on our kids are not making the gains that we had hoped. So what is it that we need to do? It doesn't mean that we continue to just do more of what we've already been doing. We need to take a step back and evaluate. This is a very different generation with very different learning needs and challenges and realities. And we need to be transforming our learning systems to be able to address not only the academic needs of our kids, but the social emotional well-being piece as well.
Very well said. Julia, you want to jump in and comment?
Yeah, I'll just speak to that last piece, the academic piece. I think, as a brand new teacher who was really held to the standard of your kids have to achieve this, goal and this numeric test number, I often felt and heard, people saying, oh, the social emotional, those skills, those can be taught at home, at school is really the place for academics. And I think what Aaliyah just said really, the pandemic really showed us that that's not the case. But I do think there is this, underlying that can be done at home. School is for academics. And, even in the classroom 20 years ago, I felt that. And I know, my friends who are still in the classroom are feeling that today. So I think it's just this constant, like Mark said, it's not new. It's evolved maybe in how people are talking about it. But I think the pressures are very similar, than they were, 10, 15 years ago today.
Julia, Deb, can I pick up on one point that Julia said?
Yep.
I love when I talk to parents or even within my parent community and they ask me that very question of, isn't this something that should be taught at home? And it's like, absolutely. And it's practiced at school. And it's practiced at school because that is where kids are with their peers. That's where they're going through these real-time challenges and opportunities. So absolutely, these skills are taught, reinforced, supported at home, but where they're truly practiced day to day is when you put a cohort of kids together and they want to build relationships because they want to have friends. They have to practice resolving conflict because they're going to be in a class with kids who are different than them. So that I love to underscore that yes, absolutely, these skills are taught and learned and practiced and supported at home, but where they are practiced the most are in classroom environments, which is why we've got to continue the integration and also the supporting of teachers.
I want to just jump on that actually for 1 second, Aaliyah, because I think that's a big missing piece in the work, which is that SEL is also pedagogy. And that so I did this very big study with 45,000 high school students across the United States to learn about their emotional lives in school. 77% of the time that they're in school, they're tired, bored, and stressed. Now, I don't know if our Department of Education, I actually presented these data to the Department of Education as a push, and and I present these all the time. And some people say, "Well, hasn't it always been that way?" And I'm like, maybe, but is that the way we want it to be? Is that a recipe for creativity and innovation? I don't think so. And what that means is that the adults who are creating lessons, who are teaching classes, need to understand how children's brains develop. And by understanding that, they can create the conditions for better learning.
They're inextricably linked. When you look at the abysmal NAEP results, which are truly mortifying as a country, we are putting ourselves further and further behind and making no progress. How could that not be inextricably linked to the moral and judgmental and everything other development of a child, particularly because they're just inextricably linked. Anyway, it's crazy. I want to go a little bit into the scientific, the science of SEL, and Mark and Lee, this is probably, let me start with you, Mark, actually. What is, you've just cited one of your studies, related to just, that's actually showing just the sort of the mental tenor or the mood tenor of the high school student body, which is certainly data we're seeing, certainly the reimagination of high school and what XQ and others are doing, I think is a very worthy endeavor given that data. But what is the most compelling evidence around social emotional learning practices and their positive impact on student outcomes, that sort of stuff?
In research, there's studies, I do millions of studies, and then there are what we call meta-analyses, which are studies of studies. And so back, in the early 2000s, a group of researchers did one meta-analysis, and my close colleague, Chris Cipriano, did a second one with other colleagues just a couple of years ago. And I think just really briefly, hundreds of thousands of kids, hundreds of studies, and the results are pretty darn clear that schools, classrooms that take this work seriously and implement it with high quality have students who do better, and they do better academically. They do better socially and emotionally, meaning they feel better about themselves. They have better physical and mental health. And important, you get the other outcomes which are important, which is that school climate is better. They like their school more. And all the things that we're afraid of, like suicidal ideation, depression, anxiety, go down. So I'm very comfortable at this point having two large meta-analyses that have been conducted, both in the United States and across the world, that we can say with confidence that this changes kids' lives.
And I want to just connect and build off of Mark's point that at this point, the data is there, the research is there, the evidence is there, pointing us, it's like that flashlight, pointing us in the direction of on where we need to go. But what I want to underscore is that the benefits of integrating this work at the school level don't just stop at school. Kids who have these foundational skills are more likely to graduate from college, like Mark mentioned, succeed in the workforce, and actually have fulfilling relationships throughout their life. They're better equipped to handle challenges, which we all face every single day. There's not a person I know, an adult that I know, that is not going through something. And thinking about collaboration, that is going to be one of the most critical skills for the future, which is where I want to talk about the future. Despite all the noise around this issue, I think there's some data points that are important to call out. And I'm going to read, I don't like to read verbatim, but because these are data points, I want to make sure I'm crisp and clear with them. 93% of parents say that it is at least somewhat important to have their children teach social and emotional skills, including about 2/3 of K-12 parents who say 66% say it is extremely or very important to them. 86% of educators say that they place some or a lot of emphasis on social emotional learning because of its positive impact on student academic outcomes. 84% say its positive impact on skills such as collaboration, communication, and critical thinking. When we talk about voters, 81% of voters identified improving social emotional learning among students as somewhat or very important. When we talk about the workforce, 7 out of the 10 most requested job skills or durable skills, which is what's being termed in the workforce, are social emotional learning skills. So when we think about these skills in the translation, not only is the evidence there for the importance in the classroom, but when you look at beyond classroom life and into the workforce, it's there as well.
Well, Aaliyah, I want to just add to what you just said. And all I can think about right now is the society that we're living in and how kids are feeling in schools and some of the challenges that we're noticing. And so what if we had a vision that policymakers were trained in emotional intelligence and social and emotional learning? And what if it were the case that as policies were created, they had to keep in mind how it would impact children's development? To me, that would be the ultimate goal of this work. And Deb, we have a conference coming up, the AI Revolution, both educators and the ed tech world. People are creating the systems for these technologies. And so if people don't have the skills that we're talking about, they're not going to be thinking about their application in these technologies. And to me, this is the largest threat we have to the AI revolution, which is that we have a bunch of unemotionally intelligent people programming and creating, systems that don't align with, this.
Yep. And thank you for the promotion. ASU+GSV Summit coming up in April. And we had one of our listeners send in a comment that she's listening with students and that complete concurrence on the point that students are bored out of their minds. So, and I guess one point is, do we have an answer for that? I mean, is part of this, if we're equipping students with more maturity, more judgment, more agency, all that, I mean, can they begin to have the independence to sort of, chart their own paths, particularly in high school, as we're talking about, where we do see the statistics, just as Mark went through them, that they are bored. And how do we help our teen students get out of that box and be able to think more creative, act more creatively, act more independently, collaboratively, to Leah's point, all that sort of stuff. Julia, why don't we pivot for a minute over to the teachers? I'm going to start with you. Obviously, teachers are burnt out. I mean, they're leaving the profession at unprecedented levels. It's not a shock. We could probably spend the rest of the hours going through the list, the litany of reasons that are that teachers are moving out of the profession, and yet it's one of the most important, if not the most important, profession in the world. All of you all are educators. Can we talk a little bit about, is this too much to ask for teachers? Is it sort of table stakes, too much to ask? How can we support teachers, et cetera? Let's hear from the experts. And Julie, I'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think overwhelmingly a teacher would say it's not too much if we have the support and the resources and the, kind of guidance from, our administration and our district to do this. I think, like you said, teacher burnout is so high right now. And I think that is one of the reasons why SEL is so important, because it's not just for students, right? It's about creating communities of people, to Mark's point, policymakers, right, who can walk around the world operating in these ways and having kind of these mindsets and these characteristics. So I think it is, if we're providing the support, if we're integrating SEL into professional development, again, it's not an add-on, right? It's not something that you do after you do math. It's something that you do while you're doing math. And I think about fostering those school cultures. And I've read research and talked to teachers who talk about, it's really hard when I'm the only one in my building who's doing it, but when I'm surrounded by teachers and an administration who is supporting this and lifting this up, it becomes a culture, it becomes a whole community. So I think when we do focus on this, and teachers are allowed to also think about their feelings and think about being creative problem solvers and all of the things that we love for teachers to be doing, right? That's why the human teacher is so important. They are able to make those connections, foster that creativity, foster that innovation. When, systems are designed to support them in doing that, I think it's a win-win-win for everybody.
I think I'll go in a slightly different route because Julia hit so many great points. I might underscore one or two, but oftentimes when I'm asked this question, I like to ask people to reflect back to their favorite teacher or the classroom that they performed best in, and to spend some time thinking about what were the qualities, the traits, the experiences that they had in that classroom. And 9 times out of 10, the class that a child, when you reflect back that you performed better in, you had a strong relationship with the teacher, you felt safe to be able to ask questions and provide inquiry in classes in a way that you could not in other classes. But at the core of it was that piece around agency, advocacy, being able to show up and have this strong relationship. Also, 9 times out of 10, that same teacher also had a great relationship with your parents. So what we know is that this work helps to foster the classroom environment that bridges those strong relationships between teacher and student, teacher and parent, which builds that school community, which also helps foster relationships in a solid learning environment within amongst students. And so it is about really, to underscore a point Julia made, providing educators with the professional development to understand the language, to be able to integrate it, because it's not like in a classroom you say, okay, we're going to do SEL right now. It truly is integrated in just the flow of the classroom. And in classrooms where the teachers do not only have the language, but the support, they end up staying in the field longer and are less likely to leave the field. So at a time that we're hemorrhaging our educators, we not only need to rethink the approach to education for our students, but also to retain our teachers as well.
I'll add on to that for a minute, which is, let's go the step up to the leaders. So we published a study recently which showed that a leader who has these skills, big study, many leaders, we measured their emotional intelligence in a variety of ways. And what we showed was that the teachers in those schools, less burnt out, more satisfied with their jobs. And we did it even during COVID, a big study. And what we found was they were less likely to want to leave their jobs even during COVID. Mm-hmm. And so what that means is that these skills actually, they matter all the time, but in a crisis, they matter even more. And that's what we've learned in the field. We've grown from being so child-focused, which is critically important. And Deb, back to your point about, well, the kid should just be engaged. You know, how many years can you sit in a classroom bored? It's really tough. I mean, it's like I go into, like, I visit schools and I'm just like, in one lesson, I'm sort of like, oh, what am I going to do? I can't take it. And I'm there for 15 minutes. Not to say there are amazing, highly engaging teachers, but when you're in that room, it's tough. And putting the pressure on the kid to figure it out, you know, as adults, we can do that. As young kids, it's tough. And then going to the teacher being skilled, the leader being skilled, and then even at the district level, because districts create policies around these things, school board members. And, you know, ideally in our work, we want to have socially and emotionally intelligent systems.
Will you talk a little bit, you and we both want to get a little down to the sort of practical, you know, or the whatever application layer, in that, you know, what is CASEL? What are you all doing specifically around support for educators, and Mark with Ruler and the other activities out of the Yale Center that, and I've had the benefit of having had, you know, great exposure to your Ruler program here in Chicago with KIPP schools, and seeing the impact that it's had on students and teachers. So maybe you guys could just talk a little bit at a sort of practical level of what does it actually mean to go in and be, it's not sort of this mystery black box. It's actually, you know, pretty common sense, actually. For a minute on that would be great.
So at CASEL, we're approaching it at a couple of different levels. We have some support at the individual level, meaning classroom teacher level with our SEL Fellows program. And that provides essentially a community of practice of almost 150 educators across the nation who are trying to lead SEL, whether it is at their school site or school district level. We also have what's called our community network partners, which that's where we focus primarily, to Mark's point, on the leadership within school districts to be able to understand what a systemic approach to SEL is. And when we say systemic approach, that means looking at all aspects of district work, from academics to school culture to discipline policies to professional development. And so we do a lot of work through our community network partners at the district level, and then at the statewide level, because there is support, to Mark's point as well, of these policy leaders through our Collaborating States initiative, where we work with either the state education agency or other state officials to understand what are approaches to evidence-based social emotional learning that can be pushed out. Then nationally, we have our annual conference. This last year, we did it in November. We had over 1,900 educators from 45 states and 30 countries who attended to be able to understand what are some of the best practices, the latest research, the policies, communication around social emotional learning. And honestly, there has been such dramatic interest because, of course, technology is slowly eroding our borders of work, that the global interest around this issue has been so magnified that we're launching an international strategy, actually April of this year, to develop a community of practice globally around SEL so that we can understand what are the innovative approaches that are happening, the research and policies in other countries. And then I think the last and most important thing that we do is we have a plethora of resources on our website, whether it's our school guide, but also our program guide, which is essentially the U.S. News and World Report edition of social emotional learning programs, because there's a lot of question of, well, what are the evidence-based programs? And housing those evidence-based programs, we are now at 99 on our list, provide guidance to those district, school, and state leaders who are trying to make decisions on what's the best approach for their local community. That program guide is a great anchor for them as well. So it's a very busy time for us, but those are just some examples of our
That's
work.
Great. Really helpful. Mark, you want to?
Sure. So, you know, CASEL, as you know, is really up here thinking very critically about policy, practice, and research to support the entire field, which is utterly important. And then at our center, we do some of that, but our primary focus is we're one of those approaches that goes into a school and works with them. You know, we say we date then we get married, and then we have a long-lasting relationship. Because this takes time. This is not something that you just like throw out of school and all of a sudden everybody's, emotionally intelligent. And I think what's important for people to understand is that there's a pathway. I think the first is getting people to have the mindsets that these things matter. Like, do you believe that how kids feel matters? There are people who say no to that question, which is, for me, frightening. But nevertheless, there are people who just think emotions, well, it's all about academics. Like, why do we care about how kids feel? And so we try to help people understand the science of how social and emotional skills are inextricably linked to attention, memory, and learning, decision-making, relationships, health, creativity, and overarching performance. Then we say, okay, well, what are the skills? And so our model is based on a theory of emotional intelligence. We call it RULER. And so we're really explicit about the skills. We're helping people read emotions more accurately, like recognize emotions in oneself and another. Understanding there are biases in that we may think we know how someone feels, but until you get to know them, you're not going to really know how they feel. So you may be attributing emotion to people without really knowing how they feel. Understanding emotions, where they come from. Building people's vocabulary is a big piece of our work so that we can articulate clearly what our experiences are. We say, if you can name it, you can tame it. Knowing how to express emotions with different people across cultures. So, for example, I grew up in northern New Jersey. You can probably tell from my hair. And I went to Korea because I'm a martial artist by avocation. And I'm like, whoa, what's going on here? Like, the rules are different here about how people touch each other, how they greet each other. And you can go in, as a judge to that culture, or you can go in as a scientist and say, wow, tell me more. What does this mean? And then finally, I think the big one is about managing emotions, which is obviously my next book about dealing with feelings, which is how do I manage my own feelings to achieve my goals in life? But importantly, and going back to the work with families and schools, how do I become a healthy co-regulator? How do I support other people in managing their emotions effectively? And just lastly, going back to the leadership piece, what we found was that when teachers perceive their school leaders as being helpful in co-regulating, for example, during the pandemic, it made a huge difference in their well-being.
That's great. And Julia, thinking about your comment on that piece or adding the parent element in, when you're an educator or when you're mentoring educators and parents are balancing or not balancing the dynamic between academic excellence, grit, and as a parent who really loved that academic excellence stuff, versus well-being and a well-rounded child, and what did you learn about, with the best advice to not only yourself and your parents, but to also teachers who you mentored throughout the process and things like that, as you sort of dealt with that balancing of two sometimes diametrically opposed, hopefully symbiotic concepts?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think, what did I learn? I think, what did you unlearn? I think a lot of this is what is not true, right? Going back to our own childhood, our own experience, sometimes, we didn't have this, right? Or we didn't have it in the way that our kids do today. So I think a lot of it was first about unlearning and learning it's okay to, show emotions or have emotions as long as you're, learning how to navigate them and feel them. I love that. Mark, I wrote down, if you can name it, you can tame it. I love that. But I think a lot of it was around, unlearning and also giving people space and time to learn, right? This is not something that you study one day and are an expert the next day, like so many things. But I think this is truly a journey, right? And it's really about understanding this is not something that you have to, in your first year of teaching, get 100% right. There are ways, there are other people you can lean on, bringing parents in. I think that's one of the biggest pieces of advice I got and that I gave is, the teachers who, I think, Aaliyah, you may have said this, like the teacher that you remember the most, like your teacher had a good relationship with your parents, use that, capitalize on that, because there is nothing that parents want more for their kids than to be successful. in school and in life. And if you can partner with parents and show them what these, elements are and bring them along with you on the journey, I think that really does make a huge, huge difference when you have that kind of community element kind of underneath all of this. So but I'm curious to hear other ideas because I'm taking notes over here.
Wonderfully said. We actually have and you guys can add if you want as well, but we have a question, another question from the audience is around character education and it improving, and the role it plays in improving SEL. So can a well-implemented character education program play a role in improving social emotional learning of students as well as the culture and climate of the school community? We'd love to hear panel's thoughts about that.
So there are some tenets of character education and social emotional learning that are absolutely aligned. And I will say this to the implementation question, that is where I think there should be a lot of focus on the quality of the implementation, because you can have a great program and a great approach, but if it's not implemented to its fidelity or appropriately, just like with math instruction or
same for everything.
Same thing. And Mark, I don't know, I mean, you're at the program level. I don't know if you have more that you would say on that.
Yeah, I think social, emotional, character development, they're all linked together. I think where it gets tricky is, and where parents, I think, get, like take a step back is, are you trying to define my child's character? And we take a step back from that. We don't want to be your child will develop his or her or their own character as they develop. And we want to stay away from this is the best way to be or this is the right way to be, because that's not what this work is about. It's about teaching people skills so they have self-awareness so they can decide for themselves, what is most important.
1000%. I'm going to do my last self-promotion here, but as Mark mentioned, we have coming up here very shortly, April 5th through the 9th in San Diego, the ASU+GSV Summit. Our theme is learning at the speed of light. Underlying that theme is, of course, the AI generation era that we are in today. The velocity of change in that era has not dissipated, and I don't suspect will dissipate anytime in the next decade. It's as on another call, it's like exhausting in some ways, just how often things change. I've sort of decided I'm waiting till I'm 90, and then I'll start learning about it, and then by then I'll have all caught up. But what I'd love to hear, it's certainly creating some fascinating opportunities and fascinating dilemmas for K-12 educators and students. It's everything from the plagiarism debates to, which I think you see a little less in K-12 than you do in higher ed, to just, can we get everyone access? Because I mean, there's some incredible things here, but if the incredible things are not provided, across the holistic population, then we will have just exacerbated the existing gaps and that sort of thing. So I'd love to hear you all layer on the generative AI era and what kind of opportunity and pressure. And then I would also add maybe, Mark, for you too, because we're also seeing as investors some really interesting opportunities for mental health support from companies that are looking to go into K-12 and really provide more mental health support for kids in a more effective way. So love to hear each of you lives in this AI world in a different way, and love to hear each of you sort of kind of give your where you see optimism and where you have concern.
So
you go ahead. Yeah.
I'll start because I think they're both connected to the role of AI and technology and also transforming learning environments. I do believe that we should spend more time talking and identifying the skills that are going to be needed to navigate these things rather than questioning the relevance of the skills. I think we've moved beyond that. It's in the water, the fluoride is there, we're here. And when I think about the skills in particular, I started writing them down because just so the audience know, this was not a scripted question. So as we're thinking about this, there's certain skills that really come to mind given to the conference theme, learning at the speed of light. One, how do we encourage our students and teachers and parents to have a growth mindset, to be able to approach the changes from a place of optimism, of setting realities? How do we encourage the skills of perspective taking? Because we're all going to experience these new tools and technology and the pace of the world differently. So how can, from my lens to your lens, understand these different perspectives? Critical examination of these topics, and not just critical examination, I'm using air quotes, but really identifying and solving the potential problems that are going to exist with some of these new initiatives. And so when I think about not just AI, technology, classroom environment, but really, what are those core foundational tenets that we need to make sure are embedded so that we then can have a robust, transformative conversation around some of these big issues that are going to change the fundamental fabric of our society?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was thinking something a little bit different, so I'll go there, but I love that. I was also growth mindset. I think a lot about just, all the tools and the technologies and the companies. I just think this is an opportunity to really expand SEL resources. Aaliyah, I love how you said on your website, there's all these resources. There's the 99, schools, or I think there's so much more out there, and I think we can really use this moment to really expand access across the globe, as you said, because I think this is just such a unique moment where people who maybe don't have that strong school environment can have access to tools that will help them, that will help their students. So I think that is really what is unique about this moment. And then I also think it's just such an opportunity to, again, be intentional. To your point, it's not just adopting everything, it's really looking at everything with that lens of what is best for my students in this school, in this environment, in this context. And I think technology also just offers us that opportunity to be really intentional about not losing that human connection, but really, powering that human connection that is so important in the classroom, and really making it unique for each student, each school. And I think that is such an opportunity in this moment.
Mm-hmm. I'll add some new thoughts, which are my biggest fear. Well, I have two big fears. The first is the decline of critical thinking, because if you're just going to ask AI to answer everything that you have any question for, you're just never going to learn how to think critically. And there's research to show that by now. So people are studying this, and it is declining people's ability to really do critical analysis. And so we just have to know that and be aware of it. The other piece of this, to me, going into the mental health space, is that we are built to be social creatures. We are born in relationship. We don't survive without relationships. And so if we're using AI to isolate people more, it's going to create more loneliness, more depression, and other physical and mental health problems. If we're using AI to help people develop the skills they need to navigate their lives and use those in the real world, I'm all for it. And I think it's going to be the best thing ever, because you can learn beautiful things that other people have used and tried that have been shown in research to be effective, but you got to go use them in the real world. You can't just sit down alone and use them. It doesn't make sense. It's not the way learning happens. Learning happens in action. Finally, in terms of the work in SEL, I think there's a great opportunity for best practices. For example, we have the three barriers to good quality implementation is admin support. My admin doesn't support this. They don't give me any support. The second is the teacher buy-in piece. And the third one is I don't have time to do this. I can't fit into my curriculum. Well, guess what? With the hundreds, if not thousands of schools that are doing this, finding the ones that are doing it well, using AI tools and looking at those best practices, and you could use those to support people learning. Here's how people combated time. Here's how people combated this. I don't think there's anything better than using that as a crowdsourcing kind of opportunity.
1,000%. And you can do it at the ASU+GSV AI Show for free.
There you go.
Thank you. Thoughtful. And the cognitive, because I think questions around real critical thinking is, I think, even more important, because what we're also seeing, and I had a conversation earlier today, is that the application of AI in the workforce is going to require that the human roles actually have better critical thinking than we have had heretofore, because we're going to be eliminating a lot of the non-critical thinking jobs. And so the disconnect between the employment system and the K-12 and higher ed systems could become more pronounced if we aren't really vigilant about it, and which is fascinating. last question. I'd love to kind of go, unless you guys have any further comment on that one.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
because in addition to AI and the critical thinking, I also want to just apply it to this algorithmic world that we're also living in, where there's algorithms mathematically calculating what is more frequently put in front of us, and to be able to your point, take a step back and understand different perspectives, but to think critically, to say, wait a minute, how could I dig deeper into this topic rather than just whatever is put in front of us? So I think in all aspects of our life, in this mathematical based world that we are entering in, well, I guess it's always been, but truly we're seeing it more now, that piece on critical thinking, and to connect it to K-12 world and workforce readiness, and even parents. This is why these skills and being practiced in the classroom are so important now, because it really is setting kids up for young people. I hate to say all kids, but young people, for those jobs of the future. And if we're not providing these skills now, they're not going to have those skills for the future.
Couldn't agree more. All right, so last question before we move on. Thank you guys. You've been amazing. It's been an amazing conversation. Just if you had the magic wand test and you could, sort of start over on the school system, what is the change you would make? We are relying on schools to a great degree, plus parents, to solve students' issues today. What would be the critical thing that you would do? Mark, let's start with you.
Right. Thanks for that. I think that we need to build schools that understand the intersection of social, emotional, and cognitive development, that we focus solely in one domain, and that domain matters, but it's not the answer to all of our life's challenges and all of our life success. And so I would give more weight to the emotional and social pieces, because they're the drivers of the academic.
So plus to Mark's point on the science of learning and development and how kids learn, and I'll connect that in a different way because I already agree. Currently, we have 19% of our students chronically absent. It's 9.4 million on an annual basis. Almost 10 million kids not showing up at school and totally checked out. And in addition to the science of learning and how kids learn, including kids' voice into the education system and truly transforming it. And that, I mean, I have a 10 and a 14-year-old, and, certainly they're not going to tell their mom what to do or their dad what to do. But the conversations about what registers to you, what's important to you, what's capturing your attention, what are you intrigued by, bringing those into day-to-day life and day-to-day school are going to be really important. So I think connecting youth voice and youth agency in a way that can help drive conversation, drive instructional and different approaches is also, that would be my choice. And again, going back to that favorite teacher, I bet that teacher not only had a good relationship with you, but understood how you learned, wanted to hear your feedback, and was able to make some adjustments to really bring that engagement in. And so that would be my addition.
And I will name, I think, not only the schools, and I think, Deborah, you said it, but the community, right? We are relying so much on schools right now to do this, and I would love to see a world where it is family plus, school plus community engagement, local organizations. Again, if we can really broaden this out and make it not so reliant on K-12 schools, but how are, local organizations, sports organizations, other people also infusing this throughout. So our students are not just going to school and experiencing this, but they're experiencing it in every single facet of their lives, I think would be huge.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful.
Can I just
sorry, you can always have the last word, Mark, of course.
I don't want the last word, but I do want to make one point related to Aaliyah's comment. In our research, going back to the research with the thousands of high school students, the thing that they asked for the most, they said, can some of what we're doing in school be relevant and meaningful to the things that I'm interested in? And so so they have a voice, but tailoring in the instruction and the activities and the classwork, just the learning environment to, those things.
Yep. And AI skilling has a role in that. Because it can be fun and engaging for high schoolers. With that, I want to thank you all. It was a fantastic conversation. Really appreciate it. Could go on all afternoon asking questions, but really, really appreciate it. Thank you all, and to be continued. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.